Hi, everybody. Welcome to Whitespawn Foundation's webinar on stress. I'm very happy to welcome our guest today. Sunita Menon is a Chennai-based psychotherapist who's been working with clients for over a decade now. She specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy and has worked with families, with couples, with workplaces, and even the LGBTQIA community. So she has a wide-ranging experience in the space of psychotherapy. I'm going to hand over to Sunita right away with the question that's the topic of this webinar, which is what is stress and what do we understand? It's a word that we use so often. I'm not sure we're using it correctly, but at the very basic level, what are we talking about when we're talking about stress?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. Stress is a word which is so often used and so often thrown at others, not really understanding the significance of it. And as I was just telling you earlier, the way we interchange it with words like anxiety and depression, yeah, stress is nothing but it's the body's reaction to any change which will require for us to make an adjustment or make a response. So the moment we have to react to that change, we call it stress.
Okay, so is there a way, is there a way for us to tell that we are stressed and, what is happening through the body? Like, what is this experience really like for the individual? If we were to unpack the experience.
See, if we take just stress, yeah, the reactions are physiological to the body. Mm-hmm. The reactions could be to our mood, and the reactions can also be to our behavior. Mm-hmm. So if we are to take just the body's reactions, it could be increased heartbeat. Mm-hmm. You could start breathing, more rapidly. Your muscles could tighten, your BP could go up, you start sweating. So these are all symptoms on your body, okay? The mood, as far as the mood goes, there could be reactions there too. You could be happy. You can be happy too, with stress. Stress does not mean only sad. Right. So you can be happy, you can be sad, you can be afraid. So these are reactions in your mood. And as far as behavior goes, you could withdraw. You could reach out for a cigarette, or you could immediately pick up a mobile. That also seems to be one of the behaviors now with stress. Immediately people take up their mobile and start, doing something with it.
Right. So when you were talking about the physiological reactions, I can't help but think of that they're sort of similar to anxiety as well. When your heart is racing and, so is there a similarity? Do they fall on some sort of spectrum? How do we compare the two?
Stress and anxiety are pretty different. Mm-hmm. Yes. So when clients come to my clinic, it's never because of stress. It's always because of anxiety. And here's how I explain the difference to them. I'm going to give you the same example. Suppose you are taking a flight to another city and you haven't booked your ticket, you haven't made reservations for your accommodation, you haven't packed your bags, then obviously you're going to be stressed because it's a task that you must complete and prepare to travel. Now, assuming you've done all of which, and if you're still worried, then that would be anxiety because you have no reason to be stressed. Everything is under control, but nevertheless, you are in that heightened state. And that would be anxiety. Right. So the two are very different. Stress can trigger anxiety.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what we often hear, that stress can sometimes be good. That stress is what makes you function and do things sometimes quicker, more efficiently. So when is it good? When does it increase productivity per se? And this is what we all hear at our workplaces, that it's not all terrible if your boss is putting pressure on you. It's because they want you to be stressed and like work hard.
There is good stress, positive stress, and there is negative stress, bad stress. Yeah. So here's how we differentiate. Good stress is when you encounter a stressor, a trigger, which can be an event, a situation, or a person. And then the cortisol levels in your system go up. And then all the physiological and the mood changes and the behavioral, behavioral changes are apparent. Then that's good stress, okay? Now what happens is we all face stress. So as long as there is a gap where your mood comes back to normal between two stressors, it's good stress. But if you find that you are not able to come back to your original mood because the stressors come one after another for you, so much so you're so filled with cortisol and your heart is always racing, you're always breathing rapidly the moment you enter your workplace, you're always in a sweat, you're always having tremors, then you know that your stressors are coming one after another. And then you also find that your physiological symptoms over a period of time turn to high blood pressure, hypertension, heart disease, cholesterol. It all becomes diseases, yes? And your mood changes change into anxiety, depression, personality disorders, and your behaviors change into things like substance abuse, addictions. Then you know your good stress has moved to negative stress, because you're constantly one stressor after another without a gap.
Okay. So is there a way, as in we will of course go to the negative part, the effects of stress, but to keep with the positive effects, is there a way to use stress to your benefit? To say that I am going to face a lot of stress at my workplace, especially if you're a part of, the current corporate culture, and I suppose it's not in the hands of the employee to design how they're going to receive stress. Is there a way to work with it and to say, here's how I'm going to use it to my benefit, and here's what I'm going to push away?
See, the first thing is every employee must realize, perhaps remember in this case, that a lot of it depends on them too. Yes? So every time you use stress as a threat and not as a challenge, it also means your attitude to stress is perhaps unhealthy. Yes? So we need to take a more positive attitude to stress, treat stress as an indicator of how important the task is at hand, rather than perhaps, it's an emotion that is overwhelming me and causing panic and anxiety. So this is about the employee themselves, yeah? Next comes the workplace. In the workplace, we can do a lot of a lot of things in order to decrease the levels of stress for our employees. Having perhaps a very inclusive culture. The culture of the organization is a very important factor, right? A culture that it focuses more on the employee than on the task. A culture that allows for innovative solutions to problems. Perhaps a culture that allows employees to experiment, to innovate, to plan, to execute, and to deliver in ways they think is best, allowing for that. So making a culture in an organization, and also perhaps another thing about culture is providing a workspace, a physical environment for the employee to function at optimum level. So these are things that the organization can do, but besides that and beyond that, much also lies with the employee.
Right. So does there come, is there a way or a point at which you can realize as the employee that this isn't working for me anymore? This is counterproductive, and I'm not using stress positively, as you said, to channel it, to use it better. What is that point, or what is that threshold at which you need to take a look at your levels of stress and say, hey, I think I need to do something about it?
This one common factor I find in my experience in the clinic, yes, people who come in with anxiety owing to increased levels of stress at work, they don't seem to have a support system. And that's perhaps that for them is the hardest thing. They don't have anyone in the organization they can go to. There's no that go-to person. And so if you don't have a support system, then the job is going to be even more difficult for you. And in spite of you trying things that are often encouraged for stress, like yoga and meditation and exercise and things of that sort, you've tried everything and still your levels of stress are high, then perhaps at that point, you should go and ask for help. If you find that your sleep patterns are disturbed, your eating habits are all awry, you don't have friends, you don't have a support system, then you should reach out and ask for help from a professional at that point.
Right. And what kind of professionals would you recommend? I think what is available in our current corporate structure?
In our current corporate sector.
Corporate sector, yeah.
There are a whole lot of organizations now that are very proactive, and they have support groups, besides which they have therapists. They also encourage you to visit a psychiatrist if you'd rather prefer that to going to a therapist. Now, here's something I find that because I was in Singapore before I came to India, and it's treated very differently there. A psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a therapist have very distinct roles to play. Somehow in India, they all seem to be, what do you say, a mishmash. So very often people don't know whom they must go to first. Many people go to a psychiatrist and then they resort to medication. But here's what I tell all my clients. First, try the easier things. And when all of them are not working for you, then resort to medication.
Right.
Rather than make that your first.
Right. Okay.
Peg.
So, is there a way, as in just, going back a few steps, is there a way to recognize what is causing your stress if it is not external? Is there a method that you'd recommend, that you tend to recommend to clients to say, here's how you identify coming from your environment? Because that also is a process to understand, is your stress coming from your workplace, is it coming from your personal life, is it the traffic? What is the way to zero in on what really is causing your stress?
Again, we must remember that if there are external factors that are contributing to your levels of stress, then you must prioritize and tell yourself, hey, these I have control over, these I don't. And the ones I have control over, let me see what I can do about it. Okay, now these are for external factors. Now there are many internal things too. For one, your own family life, your personal life, which you can't bring to work. So you internalize it. Now that could play a huge role in your mood at work, your attitude at work. Yes, so you can't leave home back at home. You need to bring it at some point to work. So there are other internal factors too. Health, for instance, if somebody suffers from ill health, that could be a factor for stress at work because they can't cope with very many things that are thrown at them at their place of work. So that would be an internal factor too. Another factor I see in my clinic is people's sexual orientation. That also causes stress at work. Yes, because they don't feel very included. Yes. Yes, these are some of the internal factors which can cause you stress at work.
Right. If from a workplace and your experience, and you did bring up, sexuality and not being able to bring your identity to the workplace, and I see how that can affect how you behave at the workplace and how your self. But are there, from your experience, common stories that you tend to hear about what is causing them people's stress at the workplace? As in, these could be managers or just the workplace. If you could just go over and tell us what you've heard most commonly in your experience.
Boss. Yeah, they're always the boogie man or boogie woman, right? Boss. Another one would be the work hours, the workload, colleagues, their interpersonal relationships with colleagues, pay package. Yes. No clear definition of their job profile, and they don't know what they're supposed to do. That causes them a lot of stress. Appraisal time. Appraisal time, we see more people with stress and anxiety coming in. Yes. Targets, unrealistic targets, having to chase them. Yeah, these are some of the common issues we see that cause stress at work.
Right. And what can organizations, if they were to commit to making systemic changes, what would you recommend and say that this is what organizations can do broadly to decrease stress levels at the workplace?
Be proactive, right? Why wait for someone to come in saying that they are stressed out at work? Because stress at work not only affects the mental health of your employee, but also the emotional well-being. which has a direct relation to the productivity of the employee and therefore the bottom line.
Right.
So it's always best for any organization to be proactive and perhaps set up a support system, encourage people to take leave rather than not take their leave that is mandated to them. Yeah, some of the things.
Okay. So I'd like to go back into going back into your experience in working with workplaces once again, and talk about, you did talk about the difference between stress and anxiety, and you were talking about how the two are different, and yet one can sort of convert to another.
Yeah, stress can trigger anxiety.
Right. How often do you see that happening? And in your experience as a psychotherapist, you see more people walking into your into your sessions where you feel like things could have been arrested far earlier. When they were talking about stress rather than coming in with symptoms of anxiety-based issues.
You're spot on. If only people knew that if they had handled, or if they could have handled increasing levels of stress from the very beginning, it perhaps would not have converted into anxiety. Because if they're chronically anxious, then we need to encourage them to go to a psychiatrist for medication. Yes. Right. So, this is an interesting, apropos what you said, women and men tend to treat stress very differently. Yes, I think with men, at least in my clinic, I find when they come and narrate stories of stress, they're very egocentric. It's always flight or fight. Yes, but women are very different when it comes to stress. We call that the tend, and they tend to be more emotional about it. They tend to process things. We call it tend and befriend. Women handle stress that way. They talk about it, they process it emotionally, which is very different from how men handle stress. So that's a significant factor, when they come to the clinic too, because there is this constructivism theory where we encourage them, if they are stressed, to look at what the problems are, the people, the support system they have. We encourage them to look for patterns and then to process it. And men and women do it all so differently, very differently.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about this process? I think our audiences would love to hear about how this works. Working with
the constructivism theory.
Yes.
So it's the 4 P's, right? So essentially, all stressors or all triggers which cause a stress are either events, situations, or people. So we always ask them to clearly state to themselves what the issue is, what is a presenting issue, and to look whether it's a situation that triggers them, or whether they're events that trigger them, or whether they're people that trigger them. And then we ask them to look for what exactly the problem with the event or the situation or the people is. What is the problem? And then we encourage them to look for patterns, because if you were to just zoom out, you invariably find patterns. And this entire thing is called processing. Every client who walks into the clinic already very clearly knows what the problem is and how that problem can be handled. They merely come in here for affirmation, reaffirmation from the therapist. They pay us, I think, more for our ears, so that we listen to them and they're able to voice what their concern is, and they themselves deliver the solution too. We just need to nod and say, yeah, great job, fine, you can do it. And that's it.
Right. And then what follows? What is, I'm not asking you what the treatment is, but what usually follows after this? What do you do with having now understood the 4 P's?
See, it's not as simple. By the time they come to us, stress is converted to things like anxiety, depression, has triggered disorders, mental disorders. So we see the further end of the spectrum. And very many of them we need to encourage to go to psychiatrists for medication. Some of them stay back in therapy saying that, hey, I want to give this a try, And then if this is not working for 3 months, then I'm going to go to a psychiatrist, in which case we run along with that. And I've specialized in something that's called cognitive behavioral therapy. So CBT essentially is about how cognitively, if you get rid of cognitive distortions, then the way you behave and the way you feel can be more functional. So yeah, that's what we work on in therapy.
Right. If one weren't in quite at the state of anxiety or anxiety-based disorders, but was, and if one is still the space where they're feeling stressed, what would you recommend as a self-care routine or things that people can do on a daily basis if if you're not yet at the space where you need to visit a therapist or seek help?
The first thing would be sunlight. I know it sounds very absurd to say sunlight, but this is what I tell all my clients. Just 20 minutes of direct sunlight on you, you'd be amazed what it can do to your mood and also your circadian rhythms. Yeah. Sunlight is a must, 20 minutes at least. The next thing is to have a routine. The moment you have a routine, you're set, you're really set. Most of us struggle with that. Another thing that we encourage clients to do, make these small changes to their lifestyle, is keep themselves hydrated. I know these sound very absurd and very simple, but you'd be amazed at what they can do to keep oneself hydrated. So exercise, endorphins, get at least 30 minutes of cardio every day. Yes. The other changes could be gratitude journal. Just being grateful. Just reminding yourself every day to be grateful for something. Keep a gratitude journal. Start your day with that rather than ending your day with it. If you remind yourself first thing in the morning that, hey, I'm grateful for all of this, then you go with that attitude, right, to work.
Right. And these are tips for the self. Is there anything that you see yourself commonly recommending to people to say that here's how you can have more healthy interpersonal relationships, which is also where a lot of stress seems to come from. In terms of how do you have a conversation with your boss, and how do you get more clarity in yourself? Since you said that's one of the things that brings about, causes stress at the workplace. So are there those kinds of tips that you can say that these are the things that I would do at the workplace to improve my interpersonal interactions, and therefore not find myself in a stressful situation?
Absolutely. In such cases, this is what we call solution focus, very brief therapy. They come in saying, I have a problem with my boss and my boss is stressing me out. And we then tend to focus on the communication style that the employee has with his or her boss. And most often we realize that either my client, that is the employee, is either passive or passively aggressive. Men tend to show more aggressive behavior. So their communication style is either aggressive, passive, or passive aggressive. So then what we do with them is we move them towards being more assertive in their communication style. Maybe it's our culture too, that one thinks that if one is assertive with one's boss, then perhaps you are stepping over certain boundaries. And then we need to reassure our client that, hey, you're just standing up for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not being aggressive, you're being assertive. Yeah. So these are some of the things we do when they have problems with interpersonal relations at work.
Right. And I'm pretty sure that this is, the stress is not just the employee, or it's also managerial, it's also leadership. It's, every level is going through a different kind of stress. And, are there exercises that you tend to recommend often to say that these are quick stress relief methods that I would recommend at the office? You did talk about, going out and getting some sunlight, but if you are chained to your desk, then what do you have?
Music, nothing like music. Yeah. Another thing would be mindfulness. We CBT practitioners are huge fans of mindfulness exercises, and it doesn't require you to go sit in a room and sit in the lotus position and zone out and focus on, No, you don't need to. The mindfulness can be done anywhere. And one of the ways I tell them is always keep a bar of chocolate in your drawer. And just take one little piece of the chocolate, put it in your mouth, shut your eyes, sit back, and allow it to melt in your mouth. Yeah, just being mindful and allow your senses to taste it, to smell it, to feel it, and that itself will calm you. It's a mindfulness exercise, maybe 2-3 minutes, but you just slow down and you just get into your here and now. Simple mindfulness exercises, we do recommend them too.
Okay, simple enough. I think we'll just pause to see if we have any questions from our audience, and then take those, and then we can come back to our other questions.
Hi Sunita, hi Pavitra.
Hello.
So we did a poll, Rashi here, sorry. We did a poll and we asked if people wished their organizations understood them better or understood their stress better. And 92% of people said yes. 75% also said that they don't work better under stress. I know we covered it and we spoke about this entire understanding of stress makes you perform better. But I feel like if you could address that a little bit more, that would be great, because I feel like a very small percentage still believe that stress can make you feel perform better. And what is the impact of such an understanding on maybe our physiology or on our brains, and how does it affect? It would be great if you could cover that.
Can I go with the reply?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. See, here's the thing about stress. It's become a bad word. It does not have to be a bad word. Stress is healthy. Thank God for stress. It's because of stress that we are into fight or flight mode, right? If not for stress, we would not have survived, for instance. So we all need stress. The only thing is, instead of making it seem like such a negative thing, we need to look at it in a more positive way. So perhaps we must change our own attitude towards stress. This is something I mentioned earlier too. Instead of treating stress as what do you say, as a threat, let's treat it as a challenge. Let's treat it as an indicator. Like every time you're stressed, you have to make a presentation. Every time you're stressed, you have to meet up and give and be reviewed by your boss. Or every time you have to meet a deadline. Why don't we just treat that as an indicator of how important the task is and give it our 100%, rather than make it seem like, ooh, it's like it's a cause for panic. No, that's not true. So we can change our attitude towards stress, and then stress can for sure increase our productivity.
So I'm going to ask a supplementary question on that, and this is so Whitestone Foundation also does a lot of workplace mental health programs, and the question that we get a lot from the leadership and managers is to say that I do want to extend empathy at the workplace, but at the end of the day, I have deadlines and I have bottom lines, and there is this fine line that most of them are usually towing, and what is the way to make sure that you're being healthy at the workplace and yet delivering?
See, this is where boundaries come, right? And the culture of the organization. The culture of the organization plays a huge role. As I mentioned earlier, if we are to focus more on the employee rather than the task, that's a healthy culture to have. So which means if we do that, then automatically an employee who has a mental health issue will be of paramount importance to us rather than him meeting his target. It's not that across the board you need to do this with every employee, but definitely if you see someone struggling to cope, then for them, you can put them above the task.
Right.
And maintaining boundaries, this is another issue. Sometimes I find that bosses, in order to empathize, go overboard, and then they don't maintain boundaries anymore. And then they struggle later on. They really struggle with the employee because they've cut them so much of slack. Now they don't know how to enforce some kind of discipline or control. That's another issue which bosses tend to face at their place of work. And people are watching. Remember, other employees are watching too.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about boundaries as well? And I think because it's an important concept, especially when when in the topic of stress itself, to say that there is the boundary for the manager and there's the boundary for the team. And what would this constitute for these two parts hierarchies, and I imagine that also is a strong concept that comes in just communication itself, and as a result, the stress that results from it. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about
Bound People struggle with boundaries. We all struggle, right? But as a therapist, I'll say this: nothing should be unconditional. Yeah, because whether it's your own spouse, whether it's your own partner, you tend to have boundaries even with them. It could be a simple chalk line boundary. Maybe with your kids, you might also have a chalk line boundary. But when it comes to at your place of work, it's nice to have a very well-defined boundary. Now, when I say well-defined, not only to yourself, but also to make it known to your employee or vice versa, so that we each know what our space is and how we must not tread into the others. If boundaries are not very clearly defined, it leads for a lot of interpersonal miscommunication, interpersonal relationships struggle at work. If you do not clearly define boundaries, do not expect the other person to know what the boundary is. Sometimes we need to spell it out to them, whether it's your co-worker, whether it's your boss, or whether it's your subordinate. It works every way.
Right. And that's a great place to sort of segue into the idea of clarity the clarity of tasks. And this seems to be a common question that we get, and also in surveys that we've conducted, we often people talk about this, and there have been enough data to show that this also brings into the conversation the idea of people being present at work too much and absent at work too much. How does this connect with stress? The concept of absenteeism and presenteeism.
Oh, that's one of the what do I say? It is one of the signs of stress, right? Absenteeism. And it has a direct relation to the bottom line for the company. Stress does lead, because most of us tend to avoid situations of stress. It's our coping mechanism. Either we overcompensate, like if I'm insecure with my boss and if I am stressed out because of my relationship with him, then I might overcompensate. I might stay, well beyond my office hours. I might do tasks that I don't need to do, but simply to impress my boss, I go about doing it. So that's overcompensatory behavior. But there are many who also want to avoid, who indulge in avoidant behavior. And one way would be to not come to work at all, not show up at all, or come late to work. And yeah, so these are, absenteeism is a huge side effect of stress.
Right, and so that's something for managers to look out for if there is this long period of absenteeism.
And even overcompensatory behavior, that too.
Staying
I mean,
long,
yeah, why do we only look at absenteeism or avoidant behavior?
Absolutely. Right, I think the question is if you work as a corporate psychologist for employees at a company, and I can imagine that you're dealing with multiple people, then where do boundaries come in? Because that becomes a little more complex.
Absolutely, spot on. You see, what happens is when you work with an institution as their counselor, as their therapist, then what happens is, at the end of the day, even over a coffee or at the water cooler, the boss or the HR comes in and says, hey, how is he doing in therapy? Which would not happen if that client visited a therapist outside the office space. Somehow the HR department or the boss thinks it's well within his ambit, well within his right to inquire about how the employee is doing in therapy. And the therapist at the workplace is caught in a catch-22 situation. Now, how much do I tell the boss? Do I tell him he's doing better? Because or else this poor guy is going to get it. So he might not be doing better, but I'm going to definitely tell the boss that, hey, he's improving. Or do I tell him that, no, I think you need to send him to a psychiatrist. Perhaps he's going to need medication. And then you're worried, will it reflect on the, on his appraisals? Yeah. So that's a really tough job for a counselor or a therapist who's working in an organization, how much to and how much to not.
Right. And that's the interaction with the manager. But what about when you are embedded in the organization, and And for all practical reasons, these are also your colleagues. So if you are the corporate psychologist, what about boundaries with the employees?
See that's what I told you. As a therapist, we are trained to maintain boundaries. Now, it should come easy to the corporate therapist. When it comes to their co-workers, to maintain it. It's essential, right? Because you simply can't talk about what you're doing once you go into the room, and even who you're seeing. So there are many organizations that tend to keep their counseling set up away from the office itself, because you don't want an employee to be seen going into the therapy room. People make assumptions then. So there are many corporates who keep the therapist and the counselor away from the place of work.
We have a question from Aarti, who asks, what are the healthy practices during breaks at work to ensure you don't burn out?
I don't know what you could do. Maybe a cup of coffee. Yeah, maybe a cup of coffee, or maybe just go out, get some fresh air, listen to music. I mean, music is so fantastic. It's one way to just calm you down. And this is something I also tell my clients, rather than using the the plugs, to use the what do you call them? The
headphones.
Yeah, and the headphones, not the ones you put into your ears. To use that so that the ambient sound is cut off, and even 5 minutes of music therapy, it just calms you. Taking a stroll, during a break you can take a stroll. Why don't you just step out? Retail therapy, go indulge. Take your wallet with you. So many things you can do during a break. But most of us stick around with our colleagues again, right? And we are in the same physical environment, even during our break hour.
I'll use this opportunity to sort of also ask you about the connection between stress and burnout. And this is an interesting time to talk about it, given that we now recognize burnout as a medical issue. And so, how does stress? What is the connection between stress and burnout?
But only at workplace. Burnout
at the workplace. Yeah.
So the way we look at stress is there are 3 stages to stress. So the first one is the trigger, of course. And then there is a resistance to it. You're fighting it. And the third one is burnout, where, hey, I can't deal with this anymore. It has just simply overwhelmed me and I am freezing. I'm going into freeze mode. I don't know how to. I don't know what more I can do. So it's either you are in the first stage, where it's the trigger, then is the resistance, and the final stage will be burnout. By the time you reach that point, perhaps you're a wee bit too late to go to the therapist. You needed to go straight to a psychiatrist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'll just come back with another question and ask, if you love your job and you're passionate about it, is there a chance that you're less likely to be stressed or burnt out?
But there are external factors too, right? Besides you being passionate and you loving your job, there are many factors beyond your control. So what do you do about that if those start stressing you out?
But in your experience, do you see a connection that you tend to fight it out a little more when there's the presence of passion for the job, or love for the job, or is that just a construct we make in our head?
Yeah, I think it's that word passion. Find your passion in life and be passionate is too often used, and not very. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that word, and it somehow oversimplifies things, right? Which is not realistic, not very practical. You could love your job, but you may not perhaps like the place where you have to go and do your job. You could love your job, but you may not perhaps like the people who work with you at your job. So there are so many factors besides you liking what you do.
Right.
People who just simply driving to my place of work, I might love my job, I might be passionate about it, but daily driving from my place of stay to my place of work might make me stressed out. So what do you do with all these external factors? Simply being passionate is not going to ensure that you don't get stressed at all.
Right. Ajay responded saying, thanks for the reality check, in case you haven't seen
Most
that.
welcome. Yeah, most welcome.
Right. Are there any more questions from the panelists? from the attendees that we can take, or should we continue to? Okay, we have one more question. Um, the concept of work-life balance. I think this is something that we hear so often, and it seems great on paper. But what does it really mean, and how do we put this into effect?
Work-life balance. See, work is just one half. The other one is your life. You as an employee or as an employer, that's just one of the roles you play. You have so many more roles to play in life. You could be a son, you could be a daughter, you could be a wife, you could be a husband, you could be a father, you could be a mother. So that's the life that you're actually leading. And this is going to work is merely one of the roles you play. So obviously coming to some kind of a balance between the two is essential. And to expect everything to come from your workplace would not be very realistic, right? So this is another thing. When one keeps expecting one's workplace to do it and be there for you and ensure that you're not stressed out, it's very unfair to the workplace also, because we also need to be accountable to ourselves. Because I spend only so many hours at work. The rest of the time, it's my life, my personal life. So I needed to be able to cope with stress. I needed to be self-reliant. I needed to be resilient. These are all qualities that I must develop for myself. So whether I'm at my place of work or whether I'm in my personal life, I still can manage stress.
Right, right. But that's not the reality of most of our lives. And how do at what point do you say that I'm going to put a hard stop to this, and this is where work ends, and this is where the rest of my life begins? Is there anything that you recommend in terms of what you'd recommend as a good sense of balance that people can utilize in their personal lives? And what indicates a sense of balance?
Again, boundaries. Why do we have to have only boundaries with people? We can even have boundaries between roles we play, right? So if I'm going to be working, then that's the role I'm playing. I must have a boundary between that and my personal life. I know it's hard to do, especially when you're working for someone. If you're your own boss or if you are the boss, it could be easier. But to a large extent, I think we must start being accountable to ourselves. There's only so much we can blame the system, right? Let's start with ourselves. Let's somewhere we needed to start. You can find that balance if you choose to. It could be at the cost of something else, but then you decide whether the cost you're going to pay is well worth the investment, as in getting a work-life balance.
It, Rupesh asked this question, why do some people treat stress and depression with medicine when it can be handled with moral support? He believes that medicines will eventually make people become exhausted. Could you talk about, treatment with medication versus treatment with moral support, as he says, or like you were saying, sense of community and support?
See, all that works if you have mild or even moderate depression or anxiety. But if you're anywhere near chronic anxiety or chronic depression, the chemical imbalance will have to be set right with medication. We would be fooling ourselves if we thought we didn't need medication. But like I said, it would be nice to give therapy a shot first. And then if that doesn't work, then go in. But definitely people with severe chronic depression and anxiety for sure need medication. Much as there are side effects, but it's really up to you, because see, here's what we believe in, and which even nowadays psychiatrists believe in, that you start medication 2-3 weeks down the line when your mood is stabilized, then go in for therapy, because you become more receptive to therapy, then therapy works for you. And then once you've learned the skills you need to cope with your anxiety or depression, then the therapist himself is monitoring you. Yeah, you keep going in for reviews every 3 weeks. He starts tapering the dosage, and then he gets you off the medication in 6 months. It's not that you have to be on medication for life. It's up to you how fast you learn the skills required to get off medication and continue with life sans depression and anxiety.
But just to do a quick recap on how to make stress work for us. I think that being the crux of the webinar itself.
First to not demonize stress. Yes, stress is not a bad word. Treat it as a challenge, and not a threat. Start practicing experiencing stress in small doses, and as you experience stress in smaller doses on a more frequent basis, perhaps you become more adept at handling it. It won't be so frightening anymore. Develop a support system, which is so important. Develop a support system, and always allow yourself to treat stress as an indicator. No matter how many times I say this is not enough, really. The moment you're stressed, remind yourself, oops, that means the task I have at hand is very important. You change your attitude and you look at it as an indicator of how important the task at hand is, then you put that stress aside and you will give all of yourself to the task at hand, rather than give in to the emotion of stress.
Right. Next question is interesting and brings in a greater sense of community. As employees, what is it that we can do to help each other in handling stress?
Just being there. This is another thing. Very often at our workplace, when we see someone down, someone not their usual self, we're so embarrassed to go and ask them. We don't. We are embarrassed, and we also feel that we shouldn't embarrass them by asking. Sometimes people are just waiting to be asked. Right. And you don't need to do it in public. You can be discreet, and there are ways in which you can, when alone with that person, very gently reminding yourself of boundaries, ask if there's anything you can do to help. And for someone who is going through stress or anxiety or depression, just seeing someone reach out can change their mood for that minute at least, right? So don't be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed to reach out, to offer and to ask for help.
Right. The next question is, how do we see signs in, of stress in our colleagues?
See, this is, if it's stress, the early signs would be if they're looking for behavioral, yes? If you're looking for behavioral signs, it could be things like, most often, substance abuse. It could be anger outbursts, anger display, what we call. It could be binge eating. It could be obesity. It could be gambling, online addictions, including shopping. These are all ways in which people tend to relieve their stress. So if you do find your colleagues doing something that you've not seen them do before, then perhaps it would be nice it could serve as a red flag for you to perhaps just ask them, hey, everything okay? That's good enough. That's really good enough.
Right. And how do you do this without seeming intrusive? I understand that "Are you doing okay?" is a light enough question, but can be perceived and can be received with resistance. Is there a way to deal with this sort of an interaction?
Someone who's down and out, trust me, just that one kind word or even a kind gesture, it doesn't have to be a word even, it can be just a kind gesture. But even a simple greeting is good enough. There are so many ways in which you can extend, but as I said earlier, boundaries. It's, like going and putting your arm around someone, for instance, would be totally inappropriate, much as you want to, give them a hug. There's nothing wrong with a hug, but perhaps it would be inappropriate at your place of work. So reminding yourself of boundaries. But if it's a friend who you're seeing struggling, then just a hug sometimes is good enough.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I do imagine it's not may not work at a workplace, but a gentle conversation perhaps. I'm sort of going to use this moment to talk about our own workplace mental health and program, and perhaps talk to you as well about it, Sunita. So, Whitestone Foundation has a workplace mental health program that we run with both corporate, small organizations, mid-sized organizations, and our primary belief is that once you create an environment that is mental health friendly, people tend to understand their own mental health issues and tend to have help seeking behavior that seems to increase. So in our mental health workplace mental health program, we look at every workplace in 3 tiers, that is employees, managers, and the leadership. And with each of these stakeholders playing a very, very important role in how the workplace then becomes mentally healthy, which is to say that employees, like we just discussed in the last question, can form support for each other. Managers can look at what allowances they can make to make sure that the workplace is mentally healthy, and leadership can look at policy changes and to make sure that these allowances are granted, and that's not against the
creating the culture,
the culture of the organization.
Absolutely.
So this is what we take to workplaces to say that while services and have a place at in the structure, it's also important to normalize the conversation around mental health in at workplaces, which is what we take with our program to make sure that we use the right language, and we make sure that just like you had pointed out, how do you then talk to your colleagues about your stress or your mental health? How do you talk to your manager? Is it okay to talk to your manager? Now, these are questions that we address in our workplace mental health program. So I think you were perfectly aligned in everything that you were talking about in terms of creating community at the workplace. In fact, the WHO talks about how the solution to mental health issues in general is for communities to step in. And for most of us, the reality is that our workplace is our community. We don't really talk to our neighbors as much as we do to our colleagues. So I think that's the only way forward.
Absolutely. Good. Right. I'm so glad. I wish more power to you guys, more power to you all. We need more people who will explain mental health and emotional well-being at workplace. We do. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's not a very nice topic, right? But we need to, simply because it's uncomfortable to talk about, it doesn't mean it does not exist.